DNC Vice-Chair David Hogg is firing back in a series of scathing tweets over efforts to rebuke him due to his controversial primary plans. The DNC has slapped the young Democrat with an ultimatum to choose between his DNC work or challenging Democratic incumbents.
DNC Chair Ken Martin announced new rules to keep DNC members neutral in primaries. The rules would need to be passed and implemented in August. This all comes after Hogg announced $20 million in financing for younger, more progressive Democrats to challenge long-seated Democrats in safe districts. The plans have come under intense scrutiny, with Democratic strategist James Carville calling him a, quote, contemptible little twerp.
Hogg took to X to voice his frustrations, writing, "They're trying to change the rules because I'm not currently breaking them. As we're seeing law firms, tech companies and so many others bowing to Trump, we all must use whatever position of power we have to fight back. And that's exactly what I'm doing." He went on to say, "We can't fix a 27% approval rating by just changing our words. We need to change who we are." Democratic strategist Max Burns says Hogg gets elected to voice voter frustration with the DNC. In response, DNC seat warmers immediately moved to change the rules and expel him. We have learned nothing.
Republican communicator Matt Whitlock says, "Don't let them get you down. Millions stand with you against the terrible DNC."
So I think there's a couple of separate issues here, Amber, that we need to kind of keep disentangled. One is that David Hogg has a critique of the Democratic Party that's essentially about there being too many people who've been in position for too long. He thinks that there are basically too many old people in senior leadership roles. And then there is the separate issue of whether he, as an official with the DNC, should be able to fund primary challenges to incumbents. I think the first critique is obviously a valid point to argue. I sympathise with a lot of it. But I do think just on an organisational party element, to actually hold a fairly high office within the DNC and then separately be running your own operation trying to knock off incumbents is a bit dodgy, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we saw something similar happening at the RNC, there would be the exact same reaction, which is, why are you trying to knock out your own party candidates in safe districts, mind you? If these were competitive districts where Democrats had not been performing well, and he said, look, these candidates are not doing well in these districts or in these states, we need to identify people who are going to better resonate with the electorate, then I think people would be more understanding. But just trying to push somebody out because you don't personally like their ideological bent doesn't seem like the right way to fix the party. And frankly, the Republicans found this out during the Tea Party wave. There were a number of incumbent Republican establishment members who were taken out by Tea Party members, and then the Tea Party members ended up losing their subsequent elections in a lot of cases, which left the party worse off overall. And I think there was a fair argument to make that the Tea Party movement was resonating well with grassroots GOP voters. People were sick and fed up with the establishment. Obviously, this is part of what led to Trump's rise in 2015. But there wasn't really a party-wide effort to really look at ways to change the party to make it more appealing. And in doing so, left a lot of what were previously safe districts up for Democrats to flip. And David Hogg is now kind of staring down the barrel of the same gun.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking back on that Republican Party history, and as well as House districts, there were winnable Senate seats that Republicans lost. Maybe the most infamous was Christine O'Donnell, who was, famously began a commercial, "I am not a witch," and that was not, it turns out, a winning gambit with a general election population. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that the idea of having the critique or having a desire to change the party, that's fine. Political parties should change over time. But if you're just using, in David Hogg's case, sort of financial muscle to kick incumbents out, and then would there be any risk of losing seats? He says he's only going to do it in safe districts, but we will see how that goes. Just on a separate topic, Amber, briefly, but relatedly, I do get why people who like Hogg would be annoyed at the DNC now saying it's absolutely imperative that we don't put a thumb on the scales, because as you're well aware, back in 2016 when Bernie Sanders first ran against Hillary Clinton, the DNC put its thumb on the scales in the most obvious way to try to get Hillary Clinton to become the nominee and to try to thwart the Sanders campaign. And I was just refreshing my memory on some of that stuff this morning. And as well as basic things like scheduling debates when the ratings were likely to be lower, there was some extraordinary stuff like giving the Clinton campaign approval or veto power over who would be the DNC communications director and things like that. And this was being done in late 2015 before anyone had cast a vote in the 2016 primary. So I do get why people on the left particularly would look askance at DNC affirmations that they would never interfere in a primary process.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's entirely fair to say that the DNC has engaged in a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to candidates. And if that is keeping out progressives that voters want or the grassroots or the base wants, then that's obviously a problem. But on the broader, point of this, I think that Hogg is kind of missing the point of what voters really want. Maybe they want economically populist Democrats, but does that really line up with the progressives that he's envisioning? We also know that voters want people who are perhaps less progressive on cultural issues or social issues. So is he really going to be identifying candidates that kind of are in the middle on social cultural issues but economically more left-wing? Or is he going to be grabbing people who have these kind of policies that are quite toxic to the average voter, and maybe they can get through a Democratic primary because 20 to 30% of the Democratic base is very progressive, but when they get to a general election, then what happens? Are they doing quote-unquote woke things that turn off voters? So it hasn't really been made clear to me where exactly David Hogg stands on that issue. And Carville calling him out is because Carville has been talking for the past several months, past the November election, about how the party's embrace of a lot of those very unpopular policies has really diminished their ability to get elected.
Yeah, I think a lot of those points are fair points that you raised there, Amber, including a lack of clarity on exactly what David Hogg wants, because he has framed this as basically there needs to be a younger generation of leadership. But he's also spoken up, I believe, in support of Nancy Pelosi, who is not, much as I respect her, she's not exactly a new generation of leadership. And I believe he was asked somewhere as well, would you support younger candidates challenging incumbents from a more centrist position than the incumbent? And I don't think he does. He does plan to do that because it doesn't align with his own views. So I take the point that there's a certain lack of clarity there.
Right. I mean, if we're looking at Midwest states, for example, the idea of just throwing in a progressive challenger because the incumbent is old doesn't solve the problem of making sure that those people are appealing to the demographic that they need to win in order to do well in those states or those districts that have a really unique electorate compared to maybe coastal cities or the South or the Northeast. Those are all incredibly different places. And adopting a sort of one-size-fits-all strategy for who's an appealing candidate just doesn't work in that case.
Those are all fair points, Amber. Up next, Trump lashes out at Fox and the Wall Street Journal with a few choice words for Rupert Murdoch. Stay with us.